our brains are lazy by design. There is a risk that because of ChatGPT and Gen AI, it touches the basic things of what is it to be human. Yeah.
First of all, confession, I have a problem. I unlock my phone more than 30 times a day. I do track it. I have a bit of data OCD. And calculators have made it so I don't have to do math anymore. GPS makes it so we don't have to navigate. We just follow the blue dot to get wherever it is we're going. AI is taking all of our first drafts, and it made me start wondering, are there jobs that my brain still does unassisted? Or are there things that it's taking away and I'm losing that power? And there's a name for this. It's cognitive offloading. Because every tool will take away a job that our brain used to do. And our brain reformats. A large portion of our brains used to be used for scent, for smell. And when we didn't need to use as much of that anymore, we started transitioning that portion over to long-term memory, which is a really interesting thing. So as those tools take over portions of our jobs, mostly that's progress. I love going to a foreign country and not having to find a paper map. I love being able to drive across the USA and not have to stop at a gas station to ask for directions. But we are losing those muscles. I now try and get around Puerto Rico without actually using the blue dot so that I can figure out, do I still know what north is and what left is and what not? Well, one of the things that I'm a big believer in, it's the name of the podcast, is asking good questions. I went to a great book school where all you did was ask questions. Are we losing those thinking muscles? Are we losing the ability to critically think, to ask good questions? Is generative AI taking in and stepping over on all this? Well, I decided to call Richard Benjamins. Dr. Benjamins is on all the sides we care about. He believes in ethical, responsible AI. He helped build that inside Telefonica, which has over 100,000 employees. He's a published author who talks about how to make AI-driven companies. He also is an expert and understands a lot about how generative AI takes over our brains, because he has an organization called brAIngym, and they are studying that exact question that's been bugging me. When we hand our thinking over to a machine, do we ever get it back? And we've talked to other people throughout the world who've said, maybe education needs to evolve. Maybe we need to teach thinking and how to think without the machine in a way that we used to teach how to write an essay. Maybe that's not as important. And we can either wait till 2035, or we could just ask Richard, and Dr. Benjamin's going to answer it for us. So thank you. How long have you been doing AI? A lot of people discovered it like on Tuesday, but I think for you it goes a lot further back.
Yes, indeed. I started AI by reading the book of Douglas Hofstadter, Gödel, Escher, Bach, book in 78. I read it in the 80s, and I did my master's in cognitive science / AI in 1988 and my PhD in 93. We were just a few people, yeah, working on AI, thinking about possibilities. And well, I kept working on it, and look where we are now.
I think it would be interesting to grab the average student and have them try and read Gödel, Escher, Bach right now.
Indeed.
I loved it back in the 80s. I think they would feed it to ChatGPT and it would summarize it as like, everything's kind of a loop and we're done. But
Indeed, yeah.
so before we talk about the cognitive offloading side, one of the topics that everyone's been going into right now is ethics, and obviously you co-founded OdiseIA ethics basically for good. But how do we keep track of what's going on? How do we give guardrails? How do we push that ahead? What's your stance on responsible AI? Should it slow us down? Should it help speed us up? Should it make sure it speeds up without killing us all?
Well, I think there are different levels at which you have to deal with this question. Yeah. If this is about responsible AI of companies, normal companies, yeah, that have a production, that have processes, responsible AI doesn't slow you down. Yeah. Actually, it can speed you up, because if you do responsible AI, in the right way. It means you do it by design. That means if you start building a new product or a new service or a new machine, a program that does AI to solve a business problem, you think about potential things that can go wrong from an early stage. Because AI is never 100%. It always makes mistakes. It can be 99.9% precise, but also 30% or 80%. And depending on the use case, that is okay or not. So if you do medical diagnosis, 70% accuracy is not very good. We have 30% errors, which means that has a big impact on people's life. Now, if you have an a responsible AI governance system and model in place in your organization, that means that people can feel free to innovate, because they think, okay, if I do this, if it's not good, maybe, it will be caught somewhere. Somebody will find out that it's not happening. So they kind of feel freer to do it. And it also allows to detect errors very early on or risks very early on. And of course, if you mitigate the risk early on before you're in the market, it's much cheaper, it's much faster. So there are a lot of positive things, even from the innovation part itself. If you speak about big tech, so the few companies in the world, which is a race. Of course, any sense of responsibility. Should we do this, even though it might create a lot of problems? Of course, if you don't do responsible AI, if you're not responsible, you can go much quicker. The question is, so for big tech, and I think that's the frustration of Europe compared to the US and China, Europe has a bit more rules, so you have to think a bit before you actually do things rather than just do it and then see what happens. It has turned out that is a kind of a break on these innovations, but it doesn't apply across the board for any organization.
When I think of ethical AI, I think of trying not to do negative things. We should make sure that if we're landing a plane, the plane does not crash. We should make sure if we are deciding, I don't know, in the military, something to attack, we make sure we're attacking the correct thing. If we are making a medical diagnosis, that we don't diagnose the wrong thing. But there's a difference between ethical AI, which is kind of avoiding the negative side, and AI for good, which is trying to create a positive impact. So how can we go from the guardrail side to aiming AI at the things that really can help humanity?
That's a good question. Actually, for me, the notion of responsible AI includes both. So it's avoiding negative impact and creating positive impacts. But the logistics and the market and the attention is completely different. So those are really not connected in the real world. And if you speak about ethical AI, most of it is about avoiding negative consequences. And most of those consequences are unintended consequences. It's not that people design to have negative impact unless you are a criminal, or you have malicious use intent.
We'll take the bad actors out of it, assuming that I believe 99% of people are 99% good. So let's assume we all would rather do the good thing than the worst thing.
But still the 1% that's maybe not good, or even if it's less than 1%, it's still millions of people. So it is still a problem. But of all the initiatives in the world around ethics, around AI, I think UNECA's recommendation is the only one who not only thinks about avoiding negative stuff, but also creating positive stuff. I think there is definitely a business case for using AI for business. There is a growing market for avoiding negative impacts. But if you look at creating positive impact, solving poverty, solving big disaster consequences, like wars, or like natural disasters like earthquake or climate change related floodings, etc., almost nothing is happening in terms of private sector investment. It's all philanthropy, it's all government, donors. I think that is a serious problem that we have in the world. We need to invest more in using technology for good purposes, even though there is no short-term profit to win. In the long term, there is profit for everybody, even for companies.
I was listening to a quote from Peter Diamandis the other day, and he said, if you want to make $1 billion, help 1 billion people. I think that if you can actually go off and do good things will happen. And maybe that's kind of, I don't know, that's a bit of karma out there, but I do agree with you. There are a lot of companies that think their number one goal should be increasing shareholder value and not going out and saying, how could our technology save more lives? How could it help more people? How could it impact for good long term? So that, yes, they'll do things. They'll give some philanthropy. They'll donate some money. They'll support this cause. They'll support their employees. But they won't say, let's make a product that we know cannot make money because its only goal is to go out and really help people. Should those companies say, but we should still do that? Or does that become the government's job? Does it become nonprofits' job to come and do things like that?
Well, I think has a role when there is a market failure, because there is no profits to gain. Yeah? If a philanthropical activity, let's say related to climate change, manages to provide a service that people in the market buy, then you have turned a market failure into a working market that becomes self-sustainable. Yeah? So I think the real challenge is to consider solving humanitarian problems, consider that as a market where people and companies are willing to buy for that service. I think that's I guess that's the only way out. And because unfortunately, in the world we live in, it turns around money. Yeah? If it doesn't make money, then it doesn't exist. Yeah? And so unless you turn a humanitarian cause into not a profit-making machine. Yeah? It should be self-sustainable. It should not depend on philanthropy. Look what's happening in the world. Yeah, when the U.S. pulled out U.S. aid, I'm in several NGOs here having a very, very hard time to survive because suddenly they lost 30% of their income. They may have some income from other donors. They may have some small self-sustainable activity. But you can't let such important things depend on the good intentions of people that tomorrow may have different intentions.
So right now, at the time we're recording this, there's a humanitarian disaster going on in Venezuela from their massive earthquakes and all the aftershocks. They are not financially equipped to just pay their way out of it like the United States would do. It's like, oh, we need to solve this problem, throw 100 billion USD at it. But Venezuela's GDP has gone down 80% in 10 years. That is an insane drop off. Yet they are facing this massive disaster. Is there a way that we can aim technology, that we can aim AI to helping those people in a short term, or is it more it's going to take long-term development to be able to help something like this in the future?
I mean, of course, every country has a different situation, yeah, and Venezuela has an extremely difficult situation. I see it always as the world is always responding, yeah, in a reactive way to disasters. Yeah? And the whole world goes to Venezuela to help. Yeah? All saving teams from all different countries in the world, they go there, they help there to alleviate the immediate response. It's all about response. Yeah? But really, it should also be about preparedness. Yeah? Because for $1 of preparedness, probably you save $10 on response. Yeah? So very simple. Of course, if you speak about buildings for an earthquake, it is very expensive. Yeah? And even it's better to do preparedness than to do response. But if you think about displaced people, yeah, because of conflicts, disasters, earthquakes, floodings, etc., it's not about only that those people are displaced. Yeah, and their lives may be in danger. They may not have safety. They may not have food. But also their economic activity is disrupted. Yeah? And people can suffer for a few weeks, but if their livelihood is destructed and they have to build it up, that takes years. Yeah? So there is technology. For instance, I work with an organization called Flowminder, already for 15 years. Actually, it was founded because of the earthquake in Haiti,
Oh,
12 years ago. And today, it is working very efficiently and effectively in DRC because of Ebola. So this NGO is an NGO, it's not just a business. It takes data from an operator, telecom operator, and turns that into mobility patterns. So mobility patterns basically say between two cities on a certain day is about 5,000 movements or 100,000 movements, or the difference. It used to be X, now it's 40% less. If you have that information at hand in a pandemic, that means that you can predict how the virus will propagate. And that means that either you can block certain movements, or you can prepare the health infrastructure of where people go in advance. So this is simply, it still happens after the disaster, but you are prepared in such a way that the impact on people and the impact maybe on economies is much less. We had a very interesting example in COVID, which unfortunately stayed in a pilot. So when COVID came in Europe, what they did is they closed down regions or cities, the administrative borders. And in doing that, they cut several business communities that did business together but suddenly couldn't because it was forbidden to travel. Now, some research with the European Commission based on telecommunications data found out that there are actually mobility units. That means that people move within the unit, but don't move out of the unit. Now imagine you have a pandemic. If you would confine that unit rather than an arbitrary administrative unit, you actually keep the business community working because they're not moving around. So it's not dangerous for them to move within their community because that's what they're already doing, but you keep doing it. So if you would confine based on technology that informs you, then actually you have the same results, maybe even a bit better, but you don't harm the economic activity. So those are things that if you learn that, you can prepare for that for the next time. So Europe could now do, for the next pandemic, we could calculate those communities. We could instruct everything that if it happens, we know what to do. Now, that kind of appetite to make that investment, because it doesn't come for free. It's not hugely expensive, but somebody has to do it. Now, that is not happening across the world.
Yeah, on one hand, you'd think a crisis would stop innovation. On the other hand, war, crisis, necessity is the mother of invention, and it spurs these pushes into the future. Puerto Rico, when we had Hurricane Maria devastate the island, we did rapid advances in training drones with machine learning to look for stranded and people that needed help, like all around the island. Why wasn't that invented before? I have no idea. Nobody thought to do it, but we did because of that. You talk about help, on the board of Flowminder, them helping figure out where the movements of people are in terms of Ebola or other issues. Ukraine with what they're doing with drone robotics development. I mean, even let's take a less dire example. Japan has an aging population, so they're advancing robots and AI to figure out how to support that. But it's really hard to look ahead. It's really hard for companies to say, what can we do with our data? What can we do with our information? What can we do with it for social good? I know you were at Telefonica and you had a whole initiative devoted to try and figuring out how to use that data for social good. That is a commercial business. What did that look like inside of Telefonica?
Well, in Telefonica, there was already an early understanding of the value of data that was generated as a byproduct of the operation. And Telefonica was able to turn it into an asset and manage that asset and then build a business out of it. Because you can use this mobility data for humanitarian causes, but it also helps logistics companies, it helps transport companies, it helps large shopping malls where to open, because you understand how how people flow. Yeah? If you want to open, let's say, a gasoline station somewhere, you're interested in that at a place where people make large distance travels. Yeah? Because those people will need gas. If you, it's a lot of cars with all short distance. Well,
Yes.
so those are simple data, that decisions that.
Yeah, we can plug our cars in at home if we're only doing short commuting.
Yeah, if you have electrical cars, also where do you put those things? Yeah, and tourism. Yeah, where the tourism statistics?
Yeah.
Where do they come from? Where do they go? How long do they stay? The telco knows that. All anonymized. Yeah, it's not individual. It's all anonymized and aggregated data. So Telefonica turned into business and actually selling that. It's not easy, yeah, because it's a completely new thing. But it started already in more than 10 years ago with that. And on the back of that, I try to use that same data for social purposes. Yeah? Now, I've never managed to turn that into a business. Yeah? Sometimes we got a little bit paid when there were specific disasters, yeah? Especially in Latin America, where Telefonica was very, very active. But in general, it's seen as a kind of social responsibility. Yeah? And social responsibility is very good, very important to start. But if you show that something works, then somebody has to step in and make it happening, because nothing comes for free. Everything has an operational cost. Everything needs maintenance, needs a team, and that has a cost. Yeah, and so the lack of appetite of investment. Yeah, even if we've seen that it works, it is still not there because there's no direct profit to gain from.
Well, so let's talk about profit, and let's talk about for-profit companies for a second. So inside of an organization, you and I have been doing this for a long time. You don't have gray in your beard, but I have a lot in mine. And whenever some big technology change comes up, there is a C-level office created to deal with it. I enjoy reading that there was a title back in the early 20th century that was CEO, and it stood for Chief Electrical Officer. And it was the person in the company who decided which factories got electricity first so that they could operate in the middle of the night versus the other factories. Now, clearly we don't have that title anymore, but then we went through Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer. It was 10 years ago, maybe, we started seeing chief data officers because everybody wanted a data-driven company, and they came up with the catchy term, data is the new oil. Well, Silicon Valley has rediscovered that phraseology and thinks they invented it, and now they're saying AI is the new oil, so now we're seeing chief AI officers. How do we... It's all about unlocking value. Like, go way back to the chief electrical officer. It was about how do we get more value for this organization if we provide electricity versus letting them work just during the day or letting them work in the dark. And they decided the machines get electricity. We don't need our office people to have lights. So the last thing to get electricity was actually the back office where the executives and the bookkeepers all sat. Well, when we got into data, to your point at Telefonica, it was about how do we take that data, how do we unlock it, maybe for social good, maybe for internal use. You wrote a book, I think, on like a data-driven company. You've got a new one coming out on an AI-driven company. How do we use these technologies to unlock value and not just hop on the hype train?
Well, when I worked in Telefonica for many years, and more than 10 in data and analytics related stuff, yeah. And what I learned, and also in AXA, insurance company, what I learned that technology, data, AI is important, but if you don't embed it into your organization, there is a big risk of doing technology things all the time, but not really creating sustainable, or let's say sustained value for the organization. Yeah. Many times, so we spoke about just a few minutes ago about using data externally, either for social purposes or for customers. But the first thing companies do is improve their own business with data and technology. And that is still the case, even though there are some sectors with huge opportunities by bringing their data outside. The large majority thinks about their own business and how can we improve. Yeah? And that's also happening now with AI. Yeah? Now, what I've learned is that it's a journey. You can't say, let's do this, and then you set up something and then it's done. No, it's a journey. Everybody, the whole organization has to learn it, and it has many different aspects to it. Yeah, there's of course a technological aspect. There is an organization aspect. Yeah, so this chief AI officer or this chief data officer, where does he or she sit? Yeah, is that in strategy? Is it in IT? Is it in marketing? Is it in digital? So these are all, well, you go to any company and this person sits somewhere, yeah? It can be directly reporting into the CEO. It can be -4, somewhere hidden in a department. Yeah?
So that at least you can claim you're doing something, but in reality, they have no power to do anything.
The point is that most organizations just do something because they don't think about it. Yeah? Or they think, well, this is a good person to do that. Let's ask him or her. And that person happens to sit somewhere. Yeah. So the point is that, and that's what I did in this first book. I identified like 20 decision points that it's better to think about them explicitly. Look at the options, look at the advantages, the disadvantages, and depending on where you are on your journey, that could be a good option. Yeah. Of course, you can do anything you like, but what many companies do is they just do something because they don't know how to deal with that decision. Yeah. And I've seen that not only in the telco industry or in the insurance industry, but in any industry, because everything goes through the same. Yeah, some go a bit quicker than others, but even public administrations and government, they go through the same suffering, they make the same mistakes, they ask the same questions, and there is hardly, of course, things are changing, but there's not enough awareness of, am I taking now an important decision that has an impact like 3 years later? Yes or no? Yeah?
So at a lot of companies right now, I advise a lot of Fortune 500 companies in the USA, and what happens is the need gets generated for why we should do process improvement, why we should do innovation, why we should rethink our whole company. That comes from the CEO or the CFO. But then with AI, they're assigning it to the IT department, the CIO. Their job is not to create need. Their job is to solve the problem which they are assigned. They care about security and stability and scalability. They don't care about process innovation. So when take your new book, it comes out in July, at least in Europe. I did pre-buy a copy from Europe because I don't want to wait for the US copy to come out in November. I encourage everybody who wants an early copy, go to Amazon UK and they will handily ship it to you. But my background is the office of the CFO, and I spend a lot of time arguing that you should take that CAIO or that person driving AI, and it makes a whole lot more sense to put it in the direct report to the CEO or direct report to the CFO and let them control it rather than get dictated over to the IT department. In your AI-driven company book, are you more talking to the IT department on what they should do with the technology? Is it more talking to the process side? Like who are you aiming it at?
Well, actually, the audience for the book is all of those. Yeah, there's actually a specific chapter that speaks about if you want to do this, you have IT, but because in the end anything is a platform. Yeah, so it ends up in IT. Is it data? Yeah, because some organizations have a separate data organization which doesn't sit in IT. And then there is AI. Yeah? Now, what I suffered a lot is that if you want to innovate with data, so you say, okay, I need a data set. And where do you get the data set from? From IT. Yeah? So can you give me this data set? Okay, it goes into a pipeline, and you get it maybe 4 weeks later. And then you said, oh, this is wrong. Can you regenerate it? That takes another 4 weeks. And then when you have the data, maybe you're 1 year later. Yeah. Now, innovation doesn't work like that. And as you said, IT is for commodity things that we know how to work, like HR systems, ERP systems, CRM systems. They're very good at that, etc. But if you want to innovate, you need speed. Yeah? And so, for instance, one thing that we did is, even though they are in different departments and they have a hard time because many of the IT things are even outsourced to third companies, and then you have a service level agreement in between. We put all the people on the same floor. At least they could talk to each other, they could ask them each other, and then they still had to go through the process. But if they complained directly to a person who then did extra effort. So there are all kinds of ways that you can go around it. Yeah. But where you put this function in the beginning, it is much more important to put it somewhere where the person wants to do it, rather than that he or she has been told to do it. Yeah? So you need a champion. You need to create results. You need to create traction. You need to create awareness of the company. Yeah. If you put it out, this has to be in IT, and IT hires somebody to do it. Okay, I have to do this, and it takes ages. Yeah. If you put it in marketing because somebody has a problem and has a mindset to innovate and to explore, things go much further. So to start, it's very much more important to have passion rather than formal authority. Now, if you want to scale, if you've done some things, you learned, you know what to do and not, then you should make it transversal. Yeah? So then you put it in somewhere that has a cross area and that matters for business. So it's a chief transformation officer, the chief digital officer, the chief operating officer. Those are all transversal for the whole business and they matter for the business. You can put it in finance because it's also transversal, but it doesn't really affect the operations. Yeah. So there are all kinds of ways that you can do. That's one thing. And how far you put it from the top is mostly a messaging thing. It's a signal you send to your employees and also to the world and to your investors. Yeah? If you say, I have somebody in there reporting to me as a CEO, that signal is much stronger than if it's somewhere buried in the organization, even though the work they can do can be exactly the same. Yeah? Of course, if you put it too high up and there is nothing behind it, then you overpromise, and that's not good either. Yeah? So
I was just at an Oracle conference 2 weeks ago, and I was mostly talking to finance people because that's my background, is helping companies figure out how financial reporting or budgeting and planning or consolidation could be improved by technology, how we can speed that process up. And I noticed there were kind of three schools of thought at that organization. There was school of thought number one, which is wait for the software vendor to add AI stuff, and then we're just all going to get it. So it was an Oracle conference. So their stance was, I can just keep doing my daily job and just wait. And one day someone will give it to me on a platter. The second school of thought was, well, I can try and just maintain my current job, but maybe automate certain tasks where if this task is something that I hate doing and I would much rather do something else, let's figure out a way to automate that task. But there was a very small segment of people that says, should I really be automating these things? Because what I'm doing is automating a human process. Instead, maybe what I should be doing is rethinking why we're doing that in the first place, because we built those processes to be human oriented. And now all we're doing is automating a human process. We really should rethink it as to why are we doing that in the first place. That third school of thought, the part of the reason it's small is that's really heavy lifting, and culture wise, getting that to work in an organization is going to be impossible. But also, that's a really difficult way to think about things, is to say, how can I come in and just imagine if there was nothing, like what would I actually create? Where do you see for a company to be AI driven? I don't think they're going to jump to that third school of thought. Where it's like, let's just imagine we had nothing and we had to build it all. How would we be computer first? How do they get through that squishy middle? Like, how do those companies go from where they are right now, which is thinking that AI was just invented in 2023 and it wasn't? How do they get from there to a true AI-driven company?
well, I think it's like I said before, it's a journey. Yeah? It's a journey, and you can't go on one day from the beginning to the end. You are at the journey, you are in different stages, yeah? Different stages of maturity, of data, of AI, culture, incentives, so across the whole organization. And you can go quicker if you make an effort, but you can't skip everything. So If you start in the small group, rethink everything, those will simply die, yeah, in an existing organization. And then, you know, this famous book of Geoffrey Moore about crossing the chasm, yeah, that speaks about early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards, yeah?
Yeah, the adoption
The
cycle.
adoptions. And even within an organization, you have laggards, you have early adopters, yeah, and you have early majority. The early majority, they need evidence that it works, and they are eager, yeah? Late majority does it. If I don't do it, I lose. So it's a negative motivation, yeah? And what is important to recognize in an organization, if you want to start here, that you start with the right group. Yeah? Don't start with laggards. They will say they will do it, but will never do it because they don't like it. Start with early adopters, yeah? Champions. But champions won't scale it through your organization. There's some point in time you need this early, yeah? this early majority that is, if there is enough evidence for this technology to improve business, they will do it. Yeah? And then, so all the laggards, and that's my experience as well, I have had many meetings in the early, let's say 10,000 something, 2012, 13. We have this wonderful group of people that can crunch your data and can help you improve. And I know exactly what I have to do. I'm doing this for 20 years. I know all the rules, all the regulations. Don't worry. Yeah? And then 1 year later or 2 years later, they completely turned over. So I found something, and now I'm doing much better, etc. So it's a cultural shift that people have to, and people have to digest. Yeah? They can't just love something from day one to another. They have to go through a process, like we all do, and you have to respect that as an organization. Yeah? So that's very important.
I think that every business leader I know needs your book. If I had enough money, I would buy them all a copy, but I don't. So everybody go out, pre-order it. I can't wait to read my copy. I I guess I should say go out, buy it, and read it while we all still know how to read. Because there might be coming a world where we're just talking to the computer and it just talks back to us, which is a nice segue into what I talked about at the beginning, which is brAIngym. So, what got you worried enough to start it?
Well, one of the first books on AI I wrote together with OdiseIA in 22, and that was the time where GPT-2 was there, and we worked a bit with that. So we put in our book in GPT-2, yeah, and then we asked questions. Who are the authors? And it gave us some. So hey, this technology is getting more powerful and more powerful. Maybe, yeah, if it's too powerful, we will stop thinking, and maybe we need a brAIngym. Yeah, so we already mentioned that in 2022.
Yeah, no one knows how to spell anymore.
But
But this is much
yeah,
more impactful.
but
Yeah.
now there is Gen AI, yeah, and of course Gen AI can do everything for us, summarizing, yeah, and we also know that, as you said in the beginning, if you stop doing things with your brain, then in the end you lose the capacity. Yeah? So far, the human brain has always been the bottleneck of doing things. Yeah, technology would help us, but it had to go through the human brain to make it happen. It would not improve. Yeah, but now we're in a situation that it might even get worse. Yeah? So I think 1 year ago or a few years ago, there was a study of MIT. Yeah? It said your brain on ChatGPT, and they did a study with 3 groups of people. One that had to write an essay, yeah, with GPT. Another one could use traditional search engines, and another group used paper and pencil. Yeah? So they wrote, then while doing the activity, they measured the brain activity. And afterwards, they did an interview about how much people had retained or owned what they had produced. And everything was as you would expect. Yeah? So brain activity on ChatGPT, minimal, whereas search engine and normal writing, there was activity. And also if they asked people how they owned, it was as you expected. Yeah. So the more you work on doing something, the more your brains work and the more you retain. Yeah. Now, if you stop doing that, that means, and because our brains are lazy by design, yeah, because I mean, there's an enormous little amount of energy that the brain runs on for the things that it can do. So whatever the brain can do to save energy, it will. So if you give something to the brain, it will take it. Yeah? And that's why it's so hard to resist to use it, because it makes your life easier. Yeah? But if you learn, I mean, we all remember that when we study something, and you say, oh my God, I have to study this exam. It takes you effort. Yeah. So this is this desired difficulty that you need to learn. Yeah. You can't just read something and you learn it. No, you have to reproduce it. You have to draw it. You have to write it down, and that gives your brain activity. Now, there is a risk that because of ChatGPT and Gen AI, there is no reason to do that anymore. Why would you? I mean, you write, you summarize, you analyze. And for us, that might not be a real problem because we have certain age. We've used our brain. We might suffer a bit. But if you're not even full grown in your brain and you still have to learn a lot, but you don't learn it, that will be a huge impact. Yeah? So that was the motivation of the brAIngym. And it's very similar, what it's called like that, because why do we go to the gym? The fitness gym? Because we're sitting all day working. Yeah? We're sitting, we're not moving. All the things in our back, the pains is because we're sitting. Yeah? We don't, people didn't used to sit. They worked out there. They didn't have to go to the gym because they were strong and they were moving. Now, why are we going?
And now I have to have my Apple Watch remind me to stand once an hour. So I'm using
Me
technology to
too.
remind me to move.
But look, why are we going to the gym? Because we want to keep working as we do. We're not going to stop working. So that's why we go to the gym. And so that's the analogy with the brAIngym. We don't think that we can stop technology. It will be used. Yeah? But in order to use it in a safe way, we need to find other things that we do with our brain that makes us not lose all those competencies. Yeah. So we do the cognitive uploading, but we need to do some cognitive uploading as well. And that is the thing of the brAIngym. So we combined research on risks because there is increasingly more literature that states those things. But there is a huge amount of research on what can you do for cognitive activity, especially for people with Alzheimer or dementia. Yeah? So what we did is we put them together and we selected from the literature to stimulate your cognitive capacity the fun things. Yeah? So throwing darts, for instance, is very good for lots of things. Yeah? For your brain, playing table football, table tennis, decision making. If you play table tennis, you take hundreds of decisions in milliseconds. Yeah? So that's very good for your brain. But of course, listening, reading, it also is part of it. Playing Scrabble is also activating. So we designed a methodology, which in Spanish is called APETECE. That means like I feel like doing it. In contrast to what people usually think about learning, you don't feel like learning because it's an effort that you have to make. And every word stands for a capacity that you need to maintain. So the A is for attention, the P is for pensamiento crítico, critical thinking, the E is for emotion, the T is for taking decisions, the other E is for experience, the C is for creativity, and the other last E is for ethics. Yeah? And we have found activities that you can do that stimulate those activities. So today, our objective is to raise awareness in the society with regulators, with governments, with educational sector that, hey, this is not something. It is not about what you said about GPS. Yeah? It's not about driving a car somewhere and not knowing how to use a map. This is about every cognitive activity. Yeah? It touches the basic things of what is it to be human. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is the danger. So we want to raise awareness, and once we've raised awareness, we want to turn this into a social business. Yeah?
I love it because it's not that a portion of our brain is dying. Our brain would love to be doing other things. It's about our brain transforming. And because of the fast adoption of generative AI, it is happening faster than we've ever seen a technological adoption. I like your point about, playing like, table football or table tennis, because humans are unique amongst all species in our ability to throw things accurately. Right. There are a few other primates that like throw feces, but we could actually, to your point about throwing a dart, there's a lot of math, and we use a portion of our brain to do that. We used to use a portion of our brain to figure out how to, throw a spear at a woolly mammoth,
Hmm.
and then we moved beyond to using it in different ways. One of the studies I saw a few years ago was about people who take photos of everything on their phones do not remember the event as well as people who put their phone down and look. But then they did a follow-on study where they found that if you looked down at your phone and saw the photo you took, you can more vividly remember it than those who did not take a photo of it. So it somehow became a memory
Hmm.
aid if you could go through that photo, but if you tried to do it independently. So I think it's about transforming. What I like about brAIngym, BRAIN Gym, is as we transform, how do we keep working those muscles out? So I think it's really impactful. I could talk to you for hours, but you've got the AI driven company coming out again, teaching people how to get that scalable, tangible economic value out of AI. When is it officially released? When can people around the world go out and buy it?
Well, in
I know what Amazon told me, I just don't know if it's right.
yeah, it's
So,
correct. So 16 July, it will be released in English in the UK. And in the US, it's November 16, where it will be local. But it can be bought on other websites in Europe of Amazon also, and in local bookstores. And I'm working on, again, a Spanish translation, Chinese translation, and maybe a Turkish translation.
yeah, I can barely speak English, and I live in Puerto Rico. Mi español es muy malo, pero mi inglés es perfecto. My Puerto Rican friends will be very excited to see your Spanish version. So as soon as that comes out, please let us know. For anybody that wants to follow you, where can they find more information about Dr. Benjamin's?
Well, in principle, you can do just a search on the internet, and my name will pop up, especially if you do it in relation to AI. Otherwise, my LinkedIn, it's just Richard Benjamins. So I think that's the best way.
Awesome. You might get 360,000 people suddenly asking to be your friend on LinkedIn. But thank you on behalf of not just me, but all the subscribers on the YouTube channel. We've talked about ethics. We've talked about not just using technology to avoid negative impact, but using technology to achieve good,
Mhm.
to actually have those positive impacts. We've talked about it from a corporate standpoint, a nonprofit, an NGO. We've even talked about it from its own brain. That is probably the most wide-reaching conversation I've ever had on this podcast in 45 minutes. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Edward, and all the people listening. And let's stay in touch.
Awesome. And that's the show. So it turns out that avoiding negative, seeking good, transforming, it not only applies to companies, it applies to your own brain. It applies to your company's models. You and a machine will always happily do your thinking. But just remember what's left of yours if you outsource that entire function. Keep it strong, keep heading forward to the future. I'm Edward Roske, and until next time, keep asking good questions.